My name is Oliver Bennett, and in the summer of 1977, I was 19 years old. My grandfather and grandmother had long passed away, leaving our old countryside house in the care of my uncle and his family. The house stood in a quiet English village called Willowbrook, a place of rolling fields, dense hedgerows, and narrow lanes, where the wind always carried the scent of wet grass and wood smoke. I didn't visit often, only once every 2 or 3 years, but every time I stepped off the train, I felt as if I was stepping into another life. The air there was different, heavier somehow, carrying with it stories whispered by the earth itself. That summer, however, something about the journey felt unusually heavy, as though an unseen hand was pushing me toward a place I should have feared. The first leg of the trip was by train. The carriage was nearly empty. Only a few scattered passengers sitting with their heads bent over newspapers. The rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the track became a kind of lullaby, but my thoughts wandered. Through the smudged window, I watched the landscape slide by clusters of oak trees, a flash of a stream, the rising silhouette of a church steeple. All the while, I couldn't shake the feeling of distance, not just between London and Willowbrook, but between my present life and the shadows of my childhood. When the train finally screeched to a halt at the tiny rural station, the platform was almost deserted. It was the kind of station where time seemed to have stopped decades ago. A faded signboard, a lone wooden bench, and the smell of damp stone walls. From here, it was a 7-kilometer walk to our house. Usually, I made the journey alone, my suitcase swinging by my side, the echo of my own footsteps my only companion. But that day was different. As soon as I stepped off the train, I saw my cousin waiting for me. And not just him. 2 other men from the area stood nearby, hands in their coat pockets, looking oddly tense. This was unusual. My cousin had rarely come to meet me at the station before, and never with company. We exchanged greetings and began the walk toward the house. The late afternoon sun threw long shadows across the fields. Birds called from the hedgerows, their cries sharp and lonely. After a few minutes, my cousin said quietly, almost under his breath, "I used to come alone, but now, no one walks here alone anymore." I frowned. "Why not? What's happened?" He didn't look at me. "I'll tell you at the house," he muttered. He lit a cigarette then, shielding the flame from the wind with his hands. The smell of tobacco drifted back toward me. "It's good to have a light with you," he said, an odd note in his voice. I glanced behind us out of habit, but the lane was empty. Only the rolling green stretched into the distance. Still, my skin prickled as though someone's gaze was fixed on my back. The longer we walked, the heavier that feeling became. I couldn't explain it, but my body seemed to know something my mind did not. And so, with the pale sun sinking behind the hills, we walked the narrow path toward Willowbrook House, unaware that the journey I had begun was not just a return to my family home, but a step into something far darker than any of us had imagined. The sun had slipped behind the rolling hills by the time we reached the edge of Willowbrook. Evening came quickly in the countryside, swallowing the fields in a pale gray light. The gravel road narrowed as it wound between dense hedges and crooked trees, their branches reaching out like skeletal fingers. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked once and then fell silent. We arrived at the old house just as dusk deepened. It stood on a slight rise, its brick walls stained dark with age, the windows deep set and blank. The house had always felt a little isolated, but that evening, it seemed to brood, like a living thing holding its breath. My uncle met us at the door, his eyes flicking over my shoulder as though expecting someone else to appear behind me. He smiled a strained smile and ushered me inside. The rooms were dim and cool, filled with the familiar scent of polished wood and coal dust. Furniture sat exactly where it had always been, yet somehow looked older, like relics from another world. I set my bag down in the guest room, but before I could unpack, my cousin came in and closed the door behind him. "There's something you should know," he said, lowering his voice. "For the past 2 or 3 months, people around here have been seeing something. A girl's shape, sometimes near the orchard, sometimes on the old path by the river. No one knows where she came from. No one dares to follow her." I laughed softly, but the sound rang hollow in the still air. "You mean a ghost?" He didn't laugh back. Just don't go outside alone at night. Uncle has locked up the outbuildings after dark. It's safer that way. I tried to dismiss it. Village rumors, I told myself. Old houses always carried stories. But later that night, as I lay in the small guest room, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. The moonlight spilled through the curtains, pale and thin, casting long shapes on the floor. Every creak of the old house sounded louder than usual, and in the quiet between those creaks, I imagined soft footsteps pacing outside the window. Days passed. Nothing overtly strange happened, yet a tension hung over the house like a film of dust. When I walked through the orchard in daylight, I sometimes felt a shift of movement at the edge of my vision, something just behind the trees, too quick to catch. The birds would go silent all at once, and I'd find myself holding my breath without knowing why. At night, the sensation deepened. It felt as if invisible eyes were fixed on me at every moment, following me from room to room. Even when the others laughed at dinner, their faces seemed tight, their smiles brittle. The old house, once a place of childhood warmth, now felt like a cage under constant surveillance. One evening, I stood at my bedroom window, looking out at the garden. The branches of the apple trees swayed slightly, though the air was still. For an instant, in the fading light, I thought I saw a figure, a girl's silhouette standing among the trees. Not moving, not turning, just standing and watching. I blinked, and she was gone. The next morning, my cousin avoided my eyes. My uncle muttered something about keeping the doors locked, and left for the fields. Their silence was worse than any story. I didn't ask more questions, but the sense of something pressing close, unseen, but constant, wrapped itself tighter around me with each passing hour. I had come to Willowbrook to visit family, to relive memories. Instead, I was walking deeper into a mystery, and a shadow, it neither named nor escaped, had begun to follow me everywhere. It was my fourth night at Willowbrook House. The day had been still and heavy, a sky the color of tarnished silver pressing down on the fields. By evening, the silence around the house felt unnatural, as though the very air was holding its breath. Inside, my uncle's family moved quietly, speaking in low voices. After dinner, I retreated to the small guest room, the creaking floorboards following me like whispers. I lay awake long past midnight. The ticking of the old clock downstairs seemed to echo through the house, each beat louder than the last. A draft hissed under the door, bringing with it the damp scent of soil and grass. The feeling of being watched had grown almost unbearable, like a weight pressing on my chest. And then, faintly, I heard it. A sound like footsteps, quick, light, as though someone was running across the veranda outside my window. My heart jolted. For a moment I lay frozen, ears straining. The footsteps came again, a rapid patter across the old wooden boards, too fast and too light to belong to my uncle or cousin. I sat up. "Who's there?" I whispered. No answer. Slowly, I rose from the bed and moved to the window. Moonlight silvered the garden. The hedges were still, the orchard a mass of black shapes. Nothing moved. Yet the footsteps continued, fading now toward the far side of the veranda. My first thought was of a thief, or some prowler taking advantage of the darkness. Heart hammering, slipped out of the room and onto the landing. The house was utterly silent. The air smelled of candle wax and damp wood. From somewhere below came a faint creak, like a door easing open. I crept down the stairs, each step a groan beneath my weight. At the back door, the latch hung loose. I pushed it open and stepped outside into the chill night. The garden spread before me in silver and black. The grass glistened with dew. Beyond the orchard, the path slopped down toward the river. For an instant, I thought I saw a figure darting between the trees, a pale shape, like a girl in a faded dress. She didn't run so much as glide, the way mist moves when a breeze catches it. I called out, my voice trembling. "Who are you?" No answer. The shape slipped between the trees and was gone. Without thinking, I followed. My bare feet sank into the wet grass. The cold bit at my skin, but I barely felt it. The orchard fell behind. The path turned to earth, then to stone, leading toward the water. Somewhere ahead, I heard the faintest sound, a laugh, high and brittle, like glass breaking, and then nothing. The next thing I remember is sunlight. I was lying on the damp stones of the riverbank, my clothes soaked with morning dew. The river flowed dark and slow beside me, its surface unbroken. My hands were scratched, my fingernails caked with soil. Birds called from the trees, and the sky was pale with dawn. I had no memory of how I had come here. No memory of leaving the house. When I staggered back up the path hours later, the house was already awake. My cousin and uncle were waiting on the porch. Their faces were pale, their eyes wide. They told me I had been gone all night. They said that just before dawn, they'd heard my laughter coming from somewhere in the orchard, but it hadn't sounded like me at all. They said I had been speaking in a woman's voice, and as they spoke, I felt a tremor pass through me, as though something inside me had stirred. A scent of damp earth filled my nostrils. For the first time, the fear I'd been feeling shifted into something worse. The certainty that whatever haunted Willowbrook had found a way inside me. The morning after I awoke by the river, the house was gripped by a silence far heavier than before. My uncle and cousin kept glancing at me as though I were no longer the same person who had arrived days ago. Even the youngest child, my little cousin, stayed away from me, his wide eyes darting like a frightened bird's. I felt strange inside my own skin, a low humming in my ears, a coldness coiling beneath my ribs. My reflection in the hallway mirror looked blurred, as though a faint mist hung between me and the glass. When I tried to speak, my voice sometimes slipped, deepening or rising into a tone that didn't sound like mine at all. That afternoon, my uncle sent for Father Grayson, an old priest from a neighboring parish. He arrived just before dusk, a tall, thin man, in a worn black coat, his face lined like dry bark. He carried a small leather satchel and a Bible, whose cover had been mended with twine. When he stepped into the house, a draft stirred the curtains as if the building itself had exhaled. Father Grayson led me into the parlor, shutting the door softly behind us. He did not sit. Instead, he opened his Bible and murmured a prayer under his breath. "Tell me," he said at last, "what you remember." I tried to explain. The footsteps on the veranda, the girl's figure in the orchard, waking at the riverbank. But as I spoke, my throat tightened. A giggle high, thin, and not my own escaped my lips. My hands clenched, the priest's eyes sharpened. In a voice that was mine, yet not mine, words spilled out without my willing them. I liked him the moment I saw him. If I hadn't, I would have burned him last night. The room seemed to darken. Father Grayson's fingers tightened on his Bible. "Who are you?" he demanded quietly. But the voice inside me only laughed a woman's laugh, brittle and cold. My cousin burst in then, pale-faced. "Father," he said, "it's the tree, the one by the edge of the orchard." He told the priest what the villagers had whispered for months, that a girl's spirit had been seen near that tree, that it had stood there for generations, gnarled and crooked, its roots sunk deep into damp earth. Some said she had been buried there long ago, punished for something no one remembered. Father Grayson listened, his lips pressed tight. "The tree anchors her," he said at last. "She lingers because something was taken from her, or destroyed." He turned to my uncle. "You must be prepared. Cutting down the tree will not appease her. It may provoke her." But by then fear had already eclipsed caution. That evening, as the sky turned bruised purple and the first bats flickered above the orchard, my uncle, my cousin, and two villagers went to the tree with axes. I watched from the veranda. The tree stood at the edge of the orchard like a sentinel, its twisted limbs black against the dim sky. The men's blows echoed like gunshots. Chips of wood flew, pale as bone. With each strike, a wave of cold air rippled through the garden, raising gooseflesh on my arms. By the time the tree cracked and toppled, a wind rose from nowhere, lifting dead leaves into a spiraling dance. I felt something tear inside me, as though a thread had been snapped. My knees buckled, a scream burst from my throat, but it was not my scream. The priest seized my shoulders and began to chant, his voice low but urgent. He sprinkled salt around me in a circle, lit a candle, and pressed a crucifix to my forehead. "You are not welcome here," he intoned. "Leave this soul." The air thickened, the candle flame bent sideways. In my ears, a woman's voice hissed, "You cut my tree, you tear my roots, but I will not go. Not yet." Father Grayson's voice rose, calling on every name of protection he knew. My body convulsed, my fingers clawing at the floorboards. The voice shrieked inside me, then broke into a sob. "He is mine," it whispered. "Even if I leave, I will follow." At last, with one final prayer, the priest cast a pinch of earth from the fallen tree into the flame. It flared bright white. The coldness inside me shuddered, then loosened like water draining from a vessel. I collapsed, gasping, the mist clearing from my eyes. Father Grayson knelt beside me. "She's gone," he murmured, "for now." But as the wind died and the candle steadied, I felt a shadow still clinging at the edge of my thoughts, like a wet handprint on glass. "She says she will follow," I whispered, my voice my own again. The priest looked at me gravely. "Then you must never return here," he said. That night, the house stayed silent. But it was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of something waiting. The morning after the ritual, the orchard looked like a battlefield, where the crooked old tree had stood for generations. Only a torn stump and scattered roots remained. The grass was churned with footprints and splinters, the air heavy with the scent of fresh sap and damp soil. Anyone else, it might have looked like an ordinary tree fell, but to me, it was as if a heart had been ripped from the earth and left bleeding. The house was quiet. No one spoke of what had happened the night before. Not my uncle, not my cousin, not even Father Grayson, who left at dawn without breakfast, his face pale as paper. The villagers drifted away by midday, muttering prayers under their breath, but their eyes lingered on me as they went, as though wondering whether I would still be there when night fell. I sat on the veranda, staring at the horizon. Everything felt both lighter and heavier at once. The pressure inside my chest was gone, but in its place was something cold, a sense of being marked. When I closed my eyes, I could still hear her voice, not loud anymore, but close, whispering from just behind the veil of thought. "I will follow, even when you leave, even when you forget." That night, I lay awake, expecting her to return, but the house stayed silent. No footsteps on the veranda, no laughter from the orchard, only the sound of the wind through the broken hedges. For the first time in days, I fell into a deep sleep, but even there, in my dreams, I felt a shadow move just out of sight. In the days that followed, my uncle and cousin tried to act normal. They cooked meals, repaired the barn roof, went about their chores, but something had shifted. My cousin stopped looking me in the eye. My uncle avoided the guest room entirely. Even the dog refused to come near me, its hackles rising whenever I stepped into the yard. When it was time for me to leave Willowbrook, no one offered to walk me to the station. I packed my bag in silence, my hands trembling as I folded my clothes. Before I left, my uncle pressed a small wooden cross into my palm. "Keep this with you," he said, "and don't come back for a while." On the train back to London, the countryside slid past like a film, unraveling, green fields, streams, church steeples, all fading into a blur. But the further I traveled, the heavier my chest became. It wasn't relief, it was dread. I knew, with the certainty of someone who's been touched by something they can't name, that she was still with me. Years passed. I stayed away from Willowbrook. I built a life elsewhere, working, moving from one small flat to another. Outwardly, I was ordinary. Friends, jobs, birthdays, all the trappings of a normal life. But at night, in the quiet moments, I'd feel her. A flicker of movement in a mirror, a breath of cold air on the back of my neck, a laugh caught at the edge of sleep, always just enough to remind me she hadn't gone. Sometimes, I'd wake in the early hours and find my hand pressed flat against the wall, as though feeling for the bark of a tree. Sometimes, I'd dream of the riverbank, the stones cold beneath me, her voice saying my name in a tone half loving, half possessive. I didn't go back to Willowbrook for decades. I told myself I never would. But shadows have a way of waiting. They don't age. They don't forget. And one winter, long after I thought I'd escaped her, something pulled me back. A letter, a death, a memory. Whatever it was, I returned to Willowbrook House. But that is another story. Did you enjoy the story? Let us know in the comments. And if you liked it, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Horror Dream. Want more stories like this? Subscribe to The Horror Dream. and will bring you more darkness, just for you. If you enjoy a little chill down your spine, stick around, like, share, and hit that subscribe button, right here on The Horror Dream. Your support keeps us going, so stay with us. Subscribe to The Horror Dream for more spine-tingling tales.